director of Sky High Farm in the Hudson Valley. So now
we work to reduce food insecurity and develop innovative solutions to prevent diet-related diseases in New York City and beyond. I'm joined here tonight by 7 amazing panelists to have a discussion that brings together farmers, producers, policy advocates, chefs, food-based nonprofits, and mutual aid workers to discuss how we can build a more resilient supply chain and reduce food insecurity in the town of Hudson, New York, and beyond. I'm going to give each of our panelists a little bit of time to introduce themselves and their connection to the topic today. We'll start with Andrew. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is Andrew Lesmore. I work at Blue Hill at Stone Barns. I've been working here for about 5.5 years, mostly in a role as purchaser and acting as a liaison between the farm on site as well as 30 or 40 plus farms in the Hudson Valley. Back in March of last year, we shifted a lot of our efforts to food response. And so that took the form of about 7,000 donated meals to frontline workers. And as the year progressed and folks, it seemed like the idea of having produce and the ability to cook for themselves became more important. We shifted into a more CSA style box donation and did over 2,000 of those. And really the heart of the program was just identifying farms that had products in the ground that they were hoping to sell to restaurants or more traditional outlets that were interrupted by COVID, and connecting those folks with the folks in need and making sure everyone financially was covered for that. And it's, I think, worth noting that we did all this through funding. And yeah, over the year, we've hopefully done a lot to move some produce, and we continue this into next year with our CSA program. So really excited to be here.
Thanks, Andrew. Ora?
Hey, my name is Ora Wise. I'm based in Brooklyn, but I'm now the executive director of Sky High Farm in the Hudson Valley. Last year, I found myself, along with the collective of folks working in the food and hospitality industry in New York, FIG, Food Issues Group, launching a citywide emergency food relief program, creating a network of restaurant and catering kitchens in partnership with grassroots community organizations in 4 out of the 5 boroughs, working with some of the communities who were hit the most by white supremacy and capitalism before, and the pandemic now, and who have the least access to institutional resources and support, like undocumented workers in our food industry, and also street vendors and GLBT homeless youth. So now at Sky High Farm, which donates 100% of the food that we produce, meat and eggs and vegetables, we are focusing this year on evolving our community food access program to be a model that's really based on intimate, long-term, horizontal relationships, partnerships with the organizations to whom we'll be donating our food, so that the people who we're donating the food to are playing a leadership role in the program. Informally this year, and moving to more and more robust leadership in the future, even in getting involved in crop planning, so that we're growing exactly what the communities that we are aiming to serve want and need, and also figuring out how we can leverage our resources, our access, our skills, our knowledge, our fundraising capabilities to build infrastructure that's needed for long-term food security. Kind of the simple way to put it would be that we aspire to the legacy of the Black Panthers, saying these are survival programs pending political revolution, so that we are right now trying to meet the urgent need for food in food insecure communities in often invisible, rural, poor communities in the Hudson Valley, and also those on the front lines of food apartheid in New York City. So hoping to be able to donate food in ways that isn't just pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it, but to be collaborating with the people who know best what solutions are needed for more long-term and total food system change.
Great, thank you. Carol.
Hi, I'm running a program in Hudson, New York that basically is preparing fresh, healthy food and delivering it to the food insecure people in Hudson as well as in the county. So we started in April of last year, so this is just our first birthday. And most of our people originally came from the sanctuary movement of Columbia County, and the social services department, and also administrators from the schools, teachers, social workers, what have you, who knew the families that were food insecure. It was from the very beginning a strictly volunteer initiative. Because the restaurants were closed, I was able to get 2 chefs from very fine restaurants in New York who wanted to help. And I should say that I had been in the business of feeding people for many years. My last restaurant was 20 years old in Hudson when I sold it. And so when I started, I didn't have chefs. I certainly couldn't cook it myself. And I just got these 2 people who brought their teams with them. And then we recruited volunteers to be driving the food all over the county, because of course we couldn't gather in the time of COVID. and we just got volunteers for everything, whatever our needs were. It was really extraordinary how the community came forward to help with volunteers and also with financial support. So we started with a GoFundMe campaign, and then as we went along, picked up more funders. Um, right now, well, I should say we started with about 200 meals a week, and not right now we're doing 950. We are near capacity, and anything. One of our focuses all along, and now is very strong, is that we're trying to identify food insecure in the county. We know that I knew from my work in the county that it existed before COVID, and the question for us is looking forward, what's going to happen after the pandemic. And my feeling is that food insecurity in this particular county is invisible. Even the people who are volunteering doing the driving are astounded at the amount of poverty that they're seeing in the county. So that's my focus now. That's why this panel was of interest to me, because the question of food insecurity is important. I mean, most of our people are supported not only by us, by food, but by food pantries and soup kitchens and, all of the things that about, SNAP program, EBT, whatever. And so we are continuing now because we have an infrastructure in place that works, but now we are starting to do surveys to try and identify the problem in the county. And Hudson especially.
Thanks, Carol. Brian?
Hi, all. Thank you for having me this evening. My name is Brian McCormack. I am Executive Director of Columbia County Sanctuary Movement. We organize with immigrants and allies to collectively support, empower, and defend our communities. We use a service to organizing model which provides survival services and engages our members in campaigns for systemic change. We've worked with a number of the panelists here tonight to provide mutual aid programming throughout the pandemic, which included distribution of over $100,000 in economic mutual aid and 200,000 pounds of food to about 300 immigrant families, primarily in Columbia and Greene County, New York. At the height of our program, we were distributing about 8,000 pounds of food a week, and right now we're right around 4,000. So it's an honor to be here tonight. We wouldn't have been able to accomplish that without so many of the panelists, and I'm excited for us to not only share our own experiences, but collectively think about how we can address local food insecurity and food insecurity on the state level.
Thanks, Brian. Lauren?
Hi, my name is Lauren Schaeffer. I am the chef at Kitty's Restaurant. We host one of the Hudson community free fridges here. I've worked with a few of the panelists here to address not only the need for food in Hudson, which is immense, but also the need for ongoing support and ongoing money to be redistributed to people so they can get access to the things that they need. I think that's it.
For now, right? Thanks.
For now, yeah.
Okay, Nick?
My name is Nick Zackos. I am the director of the Hudson Youth Department. We are a branch of the city government, the city of Hudson. And we run a drop-in youth center right in the city of Hudson and a summer camp at Oakdale Pond and Park. And food is a very important part of our program. It's very important for the youth that we serve and the families that we serve. And when we were shut down for COVID in March of last year, we mobilized pretty quickly to create a food distribution program to try to serve the families who we couldn't serve with our typical programming. And we were in a unique situation because we had access to multiple vans and an account with the Northeast Regional Food Bank, which became a huge resource for us and for the community. And so we did a couple different iterations of a food program, from food delivery to what ended up being two distributions weekly at 4 different locations within the city of Hudson, providing food from the Northeast Regional Food Bank and from some of the other speakers who are on the panel tonight, like Carol Clark and her program. And we served directly over 600 residents in the city of Hudson, and then through our partners like Columbia County Sanctuaries Movement, I think we're serving over 1,000 people a week with the program. And we ran that through the fall, early winter. We shut down because it was an outdoor program at the end of the winter. And it was a great program, and it was great working with everybody, and I'm excited to be on the panel.
We're excited to have you here. Yahaira?
Hi, my name is Yahaira, and I help organize the Mutual Aid Kitchen at La Morada restaurant. La Morada is based in the South Bronx, in the Mount Haven section of the South Bronx. We've been open for over 10 years, and we say that our secret spice is activism. So even prior to the pandemic, we were very actively involved in our community, from being in the front lines of immigration and infiltrating the detention centers to continue pushing for abolishing the NYPD and establishing more restorative and transformative justice and promoting that. So we say that the South Bronx is facing a pandemic inside of many pandemics. And that is true since we are still fighting against gentrification. And we see how there has been a lot of like non-for-profits that parachuted and were established by developers during the pandemic. We are also seeing how there is a mass eviction going on that due to the gentrification that's been happening. And of course, there's the food apartheid that the Bronx is well known for. And part of the side effects of the food apartheid is not only hunger, but it's also mass pollution, air pollution, and therefore the South Bronx being one of the highest asthma rates with one of the highest asthma rates in the nation. And that just led to us being a ticking bomb for the COVID, since the COVID-19, of course, as everybody knows, affects the lungs of folks. So we as a family closed down the restaurant because it's a family-owned restaurant owned by undocumented folks, including myself. We had to close the restaurant on March because we all got sick. And we decided to like apply to PPP and SBA and all those fancy grants that were being given from left to right to non-for-profits as well as restaurants, and we were denied from all of them. So a community member, a friend, decided to open a GoFundMe so we could be financially supported. And instead of using that money to take a staycation and get better, and we decided to use that money to start off our mutual aid kitchen, because we know as undocumented people we were struggling, then our community was also struggling, and we wanted to make sure that we survived together. And that's where the whole idea of mutual aid came through, where it's not charity, but actual community defending each other, neighbors coming together and pitching in the limited resources they have, let it be time and volunteering to like just having the ability to cook or the ability of lifting boxes, and help us like feed the rest of our neighbors, the rest of our community. So till date, since last year, we started off with feeding close to 200 people on the first day. And then the line just like kept on multiplying. Right now, we're doing an average of 5,000 meals, hot meals, every single day. And we're also distributing 24 pallets of USDA boxes on Mondays and on Wednesdays. And we are also giving over 300 grocery boxes two families in the South Bronx, Upper Manhattan, and part of Highbridge as well. And the work just continues. I am not proud of what I'm doing because I know when I see the red line that it's the bare minimum that I could do. I wish I had more resources and a fancier name and more space to do more. But all I do is out of my heart for my community, and I see the work being effective, seeing how people overcome the COVID pandemic and then the COVID virus, and just helping us feed other people. So that itself is an award for me, and it hasn't only been about like providing meals, but it's also been fighting um, for more fair distribution of resources, including the COVID-19 vaccine. Um, uh, we had to really fight for um, and continue fighting for the vaccine not to be gatekeeping, less gatekeeping in the South Bronx and in other communities of colors in New York City.
Wow, thanks. We have two more panelists, but I just want to say, Yahaira, it's an honor to be here with all of you, but I've been following the work that you guys have been doing the whole pandemic, and I'm just it's so impressive, and I'm honored to be here tonight with you. I know you feel like there's always more to do because there always is, but what you've done in your community is astonishing and amazing and really impressive. So thank you. Fabrizio.
Hi, this is Fabrizio. I'm the chef of Coteau in New York City, and also I in some other place in actually in Long Island. But I'm the chair of the Chef Alliance for Slow Food USA and Slow Food New York State. Sorry, I'm also on the board with Alexina. And during the pandemic, with other chef and friends, we founded Italians Feed America. And the first, I mean, the first distribution that we did in food, it was Alexina helped us a lot to find some food pantry where to distribute and put us in contact with different people, as well with La Morada. So far, our association is based on regrouping food from we call it Italians Feed America because most of the people on the board and helping us and the brand who support us are Italian. So in April, what we did basically we start to call all our food distributor Italian brands and ask for donation. I think that the first week we get like 13 pallet of pasta, tomato sauce, rice, everything, to distribute. On another part, we were working also I'm also on the board of the Italian Association of Chef of New York, with some of our members and board members. We organize some food to deliver to the frontline workers, and we regroup also some funds to help some of worker who lost jobs. So far today, the food that we got and we distribute everywhere in New York City, most in New York City, but also in upstate New York, permitted to create around 400,000 meals so far. We still actively distributing food that now not only give it to us by Italian brand, but also local brand, local farmer, and American producer. And we are very happy to do this. It was something that we feel it to do, and we help it also a lot of of restaurant worker who lost jobs and family. Because I feel lucky personally because I continue to work, but some of my colleague and friends also didn't have that chance to work. So they were in very bad situation. So we helped also a lot of restaurant worker.
Thanks, Fabrizio. And last but not least, Mandy.
Hi, my name's Mandy. I also live in Hudson, and I am part of the network that works with the Hudson Community Free Fridges. Past year, it was kind of like this moment where a couple of, Lauren from Kitties and Carla and Wheeler and Hannah from Little Deb's Oasis here in Hudson, and then a couple of folks, we kind of all had the same sort of moment of wanting to do a fridge or two here in Hudson. So it kind of all came together in the fall, and now there's two, and yeah, I think it's been a very interesting experience of organizing and learning deeper about mutual aid and seeing all of the different paths that are being taken in Hudson, to all the different ways that people are just trying to get food to people and trying to share. And the part of the sort of like ethos that we all talk about in the group is this idea that we want the fridges to be a place where people can feel an abundance of food, where they can open the fridge and feel like they can take whatever they want out of it, and just kind of to practice that feeling until that feeling can just, I don't know. I think it's just the practice of caring for each other, and having open access to the fridge it's been really fun, and yeah, that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more. But this is something that I wanted to talk about. And Ora, when you said pouring water into a bucket with holes in it, definitely made me think of this question that I have about how we can move away from this charitable response. People have to rely on food banks, and not that there's anything wrong with community fridges, but people having a lack of dignity and having to go to a food bank every week to feed their families, it's really not sustainable. And the emergency food system was set up to be for emergencies, not as a way for people to feed themselves and their families day in and day out. I'm wondering if you all have ideas of how we can, invest in food sovereignty and move away from this, charitable emergency food network response.
Yeah, give back the stolen land. I could start by saying that this is indigenous land, and I feel like as an indigenous woman, we have better practices on how to take care of the land and how to have a healthier ecosystem overall. And since it's like Earth Day, I just want to just say that like it's time for food sovereignty and all this talk about like food justice and food insecurity to start actually taking drastic actions. And one of them could be by setting up community gardens. Maybe it's not directly for indigenous folks, but especially in people in neighborhoods that are BIPOC, but at least it's not going to, it's not being used as an empty parking lot or as a developer lot. So we need to find more ways to create more restorative access to land, and to therefore create more easier access to gardening and creating community gardens to create food sovereignty in BIPOC communities.
I'll pickle back off of that and say that this just actually right before this panel, I think I was on a call that I think can illustrate how those of us who are also operating in the Hudson Valley can work towards that land back practice. Sometimes I think also people have gotten the memo but don't know how to do it, right? What does that look like? What are the next steps towards that? To go beyond like symbolism to actual practice. So one thing that we did is a woman who reached out to us at Sky High Farm, who has a farm nearby, reached out and said, I love what you do because we have a pretty high level of visibility and we have a platform, which is also power and a resource. So she said, you know, if you ever need more land use, let me know. So I reached out to somebody who I'm sure some of you know, Gabriela Pereira, who used to be at Grow NYC and now is with the Northeast Farmers of Color Network and Land Trust. And so we just had a conversation where we just connected this woman with a Mexican family who is looking for land in the area and can't afford it, but has all the knowledge and all the skills. They have a business plan, they have everything. And so we just started the process of getting a free lease written for them to use 20 acres of her land. And that's a start, you know, and I think that the other thing for us is, like I was saying, we're thinking about, well, we're producing this food that is urgently needed, but what is another way to share, you know, to start building the power and the leadership of the folks who've been most harmed by the food system, right? We say the emergency food system was designed just to supposedly serve in emergencies, but the economic and agricultural system was designed exactly the way that it is operating, right? Which is to keep folks in this extreme poverty and reliant on these services. And so we're also starting a program where instead of just having like random volunteer days, we're going to have a very intentionally designed farm fellowship program where because we recognize that the land that Sky High Farm is on is obviously originally stolen land, now and it's a resource. It's you know, that we can share. So we're working with Barred Prison Initiative and some other groups that are doing prison abolition work and alternatives to incarceration to have a political education and agricultural training program on the land, so that then it is kind of creating these pathways to leadership, to ownership, to skills building, to knowledge transfer, to access to land that folks don't have otherwise, which is another piece of the puzzle, right? And to say, like, how can we, you know, that there are huge missing links in the ecosystem of food, justice and food access work. And it's not accidental that the folks who are actually most impacted by the food insecurity we're talking about are often the least empowered, the least represented in the institutions that we're all a part of. So we have to be like identifying what are the educational, economic, like, you know, housing, all of these different pieces. You know, the food donation, the boxes and stuff, that's like sexy and it feels good, you know, hopefully, but there's a lot of other pieces to it that are shifting, you know, that are needed to shift it and have people not be disempowered and reliant. So those are some of the pieces that we're trying to put together in our puzzle over here, working with Yahaira and La Morada and Kitties, you know, and like folks who are trying to figure out how to create this web.
Thank you. And this kind of piggybacks a little bit on this idea, and it's not to discount anything that anyone's done, because all the community efforts, I think, are incredible. And I really do believe, you know, food should be this universal thing that brings us all together, and sharing food with each other is incredible. But again, without the work that so many of you have done through this pandemic, many people would have not just been food insecure, but actually hungry. And so how can we move away from these models of people relying on their neighbor to do the right thing or the good thing, and encourage policymakers to change the system so that people aren't running out of SNAP benefits, at the end of the month? Or what other ideas do we have there to have more than just a immediate neighbor response?
So as mentioned at SCCSM, we have a service and organizing model. One of the slogans that came out of a recent campaign that we were the regional coordinator of, the Fund Excluded Workers campaign, is who will feed us while we feed you. And it's this idea that's very practical to our region, where we have a food abundant region, and the people with the most knowledge and doing the most work, putting in the most sweat equity into the industry, are undocumented immigrants. And so when we think about restorative and systemic ways to address the injustice of food insecurity, I think we have to put in our case, our members, but undocumented immigrants, BIPOC communities, at the forefront of this process. And I think the fact that we live in a food abundant region and people of color who live in food deserts are both struggling to access food is just indicative that the problem isn't that we don't have enough food. The problem is that racism and capitalism have designed the food system in this way to intentionally exclude them. So when we're organizing with our members, it's not just here's a box of food, it's here's a box of food, here's Know Your Rights. This is the next time we're gonna have a campaign event so you can win your pandemic relief that you deserve. And this is when we're having a conversation on alternative economies and worker-owned cooperatives so that we can start the process and prepare our members for reparations and restoring the land to the people who should be stewarding it. So it sounds like, all of us are on the same page, and I really just can't wait to post-panel to collaborate with y'all in other ways.
Yeah, I also want to add on, just talking about my experience working in the South Bronx. In a way, I feel that saying how you're right, Brian, there's a lot of excess food, but a lot of it's not being reached out to poor people, disenfranchised people. I could start by talking about the USDA boxes, how the South Bronx, the Bronx in general, was one of the last boroughs to receive USDA boxes. We received them on February of this year, almost a year into the pandemic. The USDA boxes are meant to end at the end of this month, April. So practically we only got 2 or 3 months of free food boxes by the government. Meanwhile, in the beginning of the pandemic, we were not only facing deportation, mass policing, and evictions, but also infrastructure, unrepairable infrastructure in like NYCHA buildings and other buildings in the South Bronx. Well, the South Bronx itself, it's known for having so much so bad infrastructures in its buildings. So we had like a lot of people who lived in buildings that didn't have gas. Imagine that, not being able to source food because there was a shortage of food in the city. And even if you source the food, you can't cook it because there is no gas in your house. So that's when we started providing hot meals and delivering them to folks that reached us through activists who were on grounds for tenant rights. And we deliver hot meals to them to make sure that they had something to eat. Again, seeing or thinking about like the excess, the abundance of food is a luxury in the South Bronx. So this is just hopefully like with this panel, we could move some folks who have extra access to food to consider donating to the South Bronx, because while everybody else is pulling out of the South Bronx, including the federal government, we're still left with the pandemic and fighting the pandemic by ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, even when I look at pre-COVID rates of food insecurity, right? In New York City, they were as high as 1.2 million. In New York State, as high as 2.2 million. So we can't go back to that. That's unacceptable. When we're talking about getting solutions to return to a pre-COVID world, it was unacceptable then. So something really needs to shift. so that we can get to zero food insecurity. And like you've been talking about, some of those have to do with affordable housing and reparations and so much more. I don't like to use the term bright spot out of the pandemic because I just feel so many are suffering that it's not appropriate. But I do think it's interesting and unique to see the way that restaurants have been able to connect with their communities. And I'd love to hear from those of you who work in restaurants and others as well about some of the changes that you've made or different models, ways that you've connected and are feeding your community. Are any of those going to stick around after COVID?
Well, the two men who started working at the Recovery Kitchen were chefs at on Warren Street in Hudson. So they certainly, did reach out into the community and brought their own sort of teams of people to help. I wanted to say about your last question about reaching policymakers. I think one answer to a lot of the questions is sort of the one that people talk about without really having content, and that is education. I think policymakers don't know what food insecurity looks like, and they really don't know. And our friends and neighbors, even, I mean, especially in Columbia County, which looks like an affluent county, they don't know. And then on the other hand, as Brian said, our county is food abundant. But I can tell you that when I worked with children in Hudson, they didn't know the difference between a pear and a peach, which are, products that are produced around the corner. So I think that there needs to be an enormous amount of outreach and education to the people who are food insecure. We have wonderful farm stands, extraordinary farmers markets, but when you go to the farmers markets, even though they accept the SNAP benefits, you don't see poor people there, for one reason or another. They're intimidated, they think they don't recognize the food. I mean, there's so many problems. And even in trying to feed this community, our kitchen, we use all fresh products. I mean, all summer we're getting food from farms, surplus food, beautiful food, and some of which is just, produced for places like ours. But a lot of the food is really alien and for our community, and not always open to, accepting it or enjoying it as one would want. So I think that in so many areas, there's gross needs for education. If there could be people or agencies or groups that will actually reach in to the community, to the people, and talk to them about food, help them access food with money. That's what it comes down to. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done, and people don't talk about it. And I can tell you that we're doing these surveys, and you would be astounded to hear about the problems that people have accessing food. Aside from not having enough money to make ends meet. And I must say that about your refrigerators, I bring food to those refrigerators. So when we have surplus food at the kitchen, I bring it there. And people call me all the time. I have hams, turkeys. Someone just called me with a shoulder roast of pork, and they wanted to give it to the kitchen. I said, well, we're doing 950 meals a week. 2 hams are not going to help, but I send them to the refrigerators. So I think we need things like more refrigerators, just where people can go, reach in, take out, and hopefully, feel that they can use the food that's in there, because some of it might not be recognizable.
I think that, well, I think I always appreciate, or it's great to have food coming into the fridge. So it's cool to have people direct it towards the fridge. I think in terms of I think the policy, the education bit comes into not for the people who are food insecure as much as the people who are allocating resources. I think that part of, I think food, listening to people who are food insecure and listening to what kinds of foods they want to eat, I think is more important than educating them on food that they don't want to eat. I think that access and choice is a huge part of what food insecurity should be focusing on. I obviously think that I think the education part needs to come in to people who are making policies, and I think that education needs to be around how to be like uh, 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 have more caring, be more caring to communities, and to practice care with each other. And I think that telling people what kinds of food to eat, it doesn't run up against care to me. I think it's a little bit more about autonomy and choice. I guess that's my more view about where I want sort of like education. I want it to be more practice based. I want it to be like, oh, we people can make choices over what kind of food they want. And I think that's one of the coolest things that happened, I think, in Hudson this year that I am a huge advocate for is, well, the pilot program for universal basic income. I think people should just get money, and they can do whatever they want with that money. They can buy whatever food they want. They can, that's like more kind of the kind of collective dignified care that I want to see more in food systems.
I'm not saying that we should tell people what they should be eating or wanting, but we should have it being available for them, and they should be able to.
Carol, I think the audio is a little bit off. It's hard to hear you.
Oh, well, I was just saying that I'm not suggesting that we tell people what to eat or what their food choices should be, but rather introducing foods to them that we think is or know is nutritious and healthful, because you are concerned with health. I mean, you talked about it at the beginning about disease and health, and this is, I mean, food is really important, and I think people should know about more foods than, things that I hear about: hot dogs, chicken McNuggets, macaroni and cheese, pasta, pasta, pasta. There are other things that people, perhaps if they tasted it, knew about it, they might enjoy it. And also different ethnic foods, which, we think we've had great experience with.
Yeah, to your point, Carol, I just want to jump in. Hi, I'm Shanika. I'm with Spark of Hudson. Mandy mentioned our universal basic income pilot, which is a really good example of what Spark is trying to do in this community. Like we really want to give people the choice because that is where the dignity lies. Speaking from my experience as someone who grew up food insecure in Brooklyn, New York, a child of immigrants, it was never about my mom not knowing what was nutritious, but how was she able to buy that with the limited resources she got from the state. And so especially knowing about the networks in Hudson, there actually is a lot of people who do great work around food education. There's a plethora of programs, actually, I would say more than up until this year, we've gotten the opposite of that, which is programs that are trying to directly give people food. And so I think, and you mentioned the farmers market, which is why I wanted to chime in, because I think with things like that, especially being a part of outreach efforts to other communities that get SNAP benefits to get them to the farmers market, I can say from experience, it's not because they don't know what the food is. You're talking a lot of the population of being immigrant populations who probably are used to eating better than we are culturally as Americans. The problem is you have to look at, is this a welcoming space? What is access, right? This panel is called Food and Access. And it's do people feel like they have access to this space? This is part of what, putting this panel together on Earth Day is to shine a light on why are so many of these conversations and things that we talk about when it comes to climate a luxury? like the idea of like luxurizing these things that are not luxuries. They're like a lot of the times indigenous traditions that have been lost and that we need to get back to. So I guess for me, it's like, I don't think it's more of like, we need to educate people on what's healthy or what's not. It's more of like, we need to make sure that we're actually facilitating a welcoming space and meeting people like they're human beings.
Yeah, I certainly would agree completely with that. Restoring dignity to the process and moving away from, having people stand online in a food pantry, and of course, New York City, New York has free universal breakfast and lunch, but I remember growing up as a child on free school lunch, and I just wouldn't eat it. I wouldn't go stand in that line, because you would be labeled as a poor kid. So really thinking of ways to move away from that and restore dignity to response are really important. With that being said, with the farmers market thing, and some of the supply chains and food hubs, New York State and New York City they are places of abundance. And so the problem isn't that we don't have enough food, it's getting food to people who need it the most in a dignified way. So what are some of the innovative solutions around that? And even just like, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but even the label of like food waste, right? Oh, we're re-diverting food waste. So why do poor people have to eat wasted food? No, that label in and of itself is really off-putting. So how can we think of how to redistribute food to those who need it the most in a dignified way?
I'll chime in here, and it's certainly not a solution, but I think there's a unique perspective that restaurants have as food processors in a very blunt sense, is the ability to take excess and not waste, but just the ability to identify what is an excess and add value to that by preserving it in some way, either through traditional preservation or really just cooking it down. And I think how that gets to a community is another leg of the marathon. But just realizing that as a restaurant, depending on the privilege that you have as a restaurant, and obviously Blue Hill Sun Barns has a lot of privilege, but even for a small restaurant, there is an ability to work with excess and add value to that and add health to that, and then partner with all these different great organizations to get that to folks.
I agree. I think what Andrew said, we had figured out a way to position the restaurant and catering kitchens that we were working with during the past year as a way to intervene kind of into that sadly like tendency to equate food rescue with food relief. And that was really problematic, right? So we were basically having distributors, or even like, understandably on their end sometimes, whether it was like the green market saying you can come and pick up, but if you pick up, you have to take everything. Which I understand from their capacity point, like I get it for sure. But on the other hand, we had like people, different distributors of like local or organic stuff that were they're dropping stuff to us that we're like, we can't put this in people's bags. Like now we're just paying to cart your compost, right? Like is basically what's happening. But at the same time, there was some, and we're like, wait, food rescue does need to happen, right? Like we have to figure out more efficient and sustainable ways of managing food waste. And so food rescue needs to happen, but it cannot and should not be equated with food relief and food access, right? And that's a real problem. But there were ways that then we could, one, intervene and push back on that and say that needs to go somewhere else, and you can't equate this. And having to do a lot of race and class intervention and re-education, right? Where we also saw some of our fellow restaurants who were getting money from different initiatives, and we're like, where's that money going? Because what you're putting in these packs, you would never serve to your customers. You would never put this crap in your Williamsburg or West Village like customers like on their tables. So that was like a point where we then found ourselves doing a lot of interventions that were about calling managers or chefs out on the inherent like racism and classism that was coming out in those moments. So hopefully there were some moments of learning and change, but also from the technical side, like Andrew's saying, we were able to also take some food that was totally usable, but be able to, because we had the equipment and the skill and the cool storage and the canning and whatever, be able to make it usable, and then be able to say, okay, that kind of intervention was like, yes, you can give us these seconds or this bruised stuff or this wilted, braising greens, and we can make it into something that can be usable. But overall, it was also interesting because we were like, that thought, like thinking about also what, in terms of people donating, and Carol, I do actually resonate. People are like, we have 25 meals, and I'm like, that that is not going to help us here. Or if they're like, I have this kind of thing, to say you have to be thinking about, how is it packaged, how is it getting there, like what is its shelf life. Because like Mandy's saying, we're not having the information and the education come from that direction more, because the care and what is needed and what is healthful and what is quality and everything is not, like, people aren't receiving that from the direction of the people that they see themselves helping, right? And so that is one of the big things. But I do think when we do it in a really, really explicitly anti-racist, like anti-classist way, and in a way that's like saying, we're going to be paying really close attention to what are the challenges of doing this food access work, then like restaurant folks can be, when like trained to really like focus on that, we are obsessed with quality and obsessed with like systems and making sure it works, so then we can really like mobilize in the right way.
I know it's.
Yeah, I would just, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I know it's already 7 o'clock, so if anybody does need to sign off, just feel free to do so. But Brian, go ahead, and then there's a couple other questions I did just want to touch upon if we have time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think for a lot of us on this call, the best way to address the systemic issue of food insecurity is by listening. I feel like we have a ton of resources collectively, and that's part of the reason we're panelists. We represent, communities or of communities that are directly impacted. But for example, the ideas that we think are innovative, that doesn't mean that we have the right or the control to say that this is the solution. So when I frame things like alternative economies and worker-owned cooperatives, it's not that our organization is like, this is the answer, we're going to roll with this. The process is to bring ideas and create space and facilitate conversations within our membership, so that if they think that's a good idea, we can provide the resources and they can still have the ownership of actually doing it. And this whole conversation is reminding me of my time studying and living with the Zapatistas, where they were receiving charity, and there's this famous story where they received a single pink stiletto that was donated to them. And it was just a symbolism of people are just giving us things that they think we need. And so they completely redefined how they engaged with international aid on their own terms. And instead, we're telling people what they need. And if you can't offer that, then, we don't need to be collaborating necessarily right now. So I think, the best thing to do for systemic solutions is just look to the grassroots and the people who are closest to the problem, because they'll be able to guide us with the solutions. And I encourage all of us and everyone who's watching to help resource those people, because that's where the solution is going to come from, in my eyes, and with our experience with our members.
Definitely. I mean, I do want to touch upon one specific population. Many of the hungriest New Yorkers are undocumented immigrants, both because they're usually paid really low wages and they're not eligible for SNAP. They didn't get the stimulus checks. Many undocumented immigrants are afraid to talk, to anybody about some of the issues that they're experiencing right now. So I think this is a particular population that's sometimes hard to reach, and also experiencing a great need. Many were frontline workers who are impacted by COVID. I know a lot of you work with this population. What's been successful and what still needs to happen here?
Yeah, so as an undocumented person, I want to jump into this. First, I think what made our space very successful, La Morada, is that we consider ourselves and try to work into making La Morada a sanctuary space not only for undocumented people, but for BIPOC people in general. So a lot of our work, our mutual aid work, it's not only about giving, but it's also just like the Zapatista restricting, not only restricting donations that may not necessarily benefit or are given with a good intention, but also restrict people, certain types of people like ICE, the NYPD, any police force, and politicians, so they won't co-opt or use our place as a photo op for any political campaign or any sort of like publicity. We also don't work with like developers because we know that they will cause mass evictions soon. They cause gentrification, and in essence, they just cause a mass exodus of our immigrant community. So we don't work with agents that afflict any sort of oppression to our communities, and we created this sanctuary space. And we're very open about our narratives as well, as undocumented folks, and that's the reason why it was very easy for us to reach out and identify and serve the undocumented community during this pandemic.
Thank you so much, just for your honesty as well. I haven't really gotten a chance to hear from Nick or Lauren, and I know we've kind of jumped around a lot because we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to give you both a chance to say anything about some of the questions or anything else you want to add to the conversation.
Nick, do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
Go for it, Lauren. I'll follow up.
Okay. Well, I did want to address the restaurant question that you spoke to earlier. Kitty's, I'm in a really, well, what I feel is a very privileged position here. I feel like I can pay my staff fairly. I can sell food at a very slim profit margin, and I can create a healthy restaurant environment because I have low rent in this space. We are actively and constantly seeking out organizations that we can promote and support. So please, everyone on this panel, I've worked with some of you, I haven't worked with all of you, and I would love to work with all of you. Politically, I think that the stigma against people who are food insecure and poor people in this country is like our major barrier to getting legislation written that will actively benefit people who are food insecure. I witnessed that when I originally wanted to start the free fridge. I applied for a grant with our tourism board here in Hudson, and the amount, although I have access to all kinds of insurance here at this restaurant, property insurance, business insurance, the amount of bureaucracy that they wanted for us to receive a $5,000 grant to buy a fridge, to pay an artist, to pay for electricity for a year. It was probably like 25 to 35 hours of my time. And the closer we got, the more it started to feel fishy. And we decided that we couldn't work with policymakers or people who had access to those grant funds, and we just had to do it without them, because we were risking the whole project for people. We were risking everything we wanted to do when we knew there was a need if we were going to continue down that path. So I want policy solutions, and they feel so far away, and that feels really hard. And your questions are so good. And I'm like, I don't know what that answer is, because I feel like every time I try that avenue, it feels in disservice to the people who need it. I think that those, yeah, I really want to collaborate with all of you. I really want people to have access to food. And I guess the last thing with working with undocumented populations, that was one thing that felt really radical about the fridge. Um, I feel like the stigma, because you choose what you take, when you go, who sees you. I feel like that can be so terrifying to try to get any kind of assistance through a legal path, through like a government pathway sometimes. And that was one thing that I felt rad about having the fridge. And I think that we need more in Hudson. I do just want to say, and Mandy, and I think probably everyone who lives in Hudson can, in the Hudson Valley can speak to this. We put food in the fridge and it's gone in like a half hour. We can't keep up with how many people want food. Like we would be posting like 30 times a day on Instagram. So the need is there, and I feel so lucky to be sharing this moment with all of you who want that too, who want people to have access to food. Thank you.
Nick, anything you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I appreciate being on the panel, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk, but I would just second that for me, this has just been great. And I also feel very happy being in a place of listening to all of these voices and listening to what people are saying. One thing that I'll quickly comment on that was kind of just a takeaway that I had through running this program and working with so many of the people on this call was specifically my experience going to the Northeast Regional Food Bank for the first time to pick up food there, and seeing the unbelievable amount of food that they had to offer. And the only limiting factor that we really had was the capacity of our vans, both in weight and volume, but we were literally bringing back thousands and thousands of pounds of food twice a week. And one thing that I'll say is that it was not food waste. It was so much of the food there was incredible food that I would want to bring home for my family. That was amazing food. And I guess it goes back to what Brian was saying in his introduction, is this feeling that I had of both saying, this is amazing, look at all this incredible food, we can bring this back, we can do this, we can provide this great service, and then kind of realizing how horrible that was, that this system was so broken, or not broken, but maybe meant to be that way, and was maybe perpetuating so many of the issues that we've all been talking about. But it really is. I mean, for anybody to go up there, I can't describe what it's like to experience all of that food that's not going to go to a good place, and then to see all the people who are in such desperate need and in such food insecurity. That dichotomy was really difficult, and it was wonderful to be able to help for the time that we were able to. But I think we really do need larger scale solutions, because the problem is so big on both sides. And so this has been a great experience for me to hear from people on the front lines. And I really appreciate being a part of this conversation.
Thank you. I think we could talk for hours about this. Does anyone else have anything they want to chime in? And then I have to sign off, but I know there might be some questions from the audience from anyone who can stick around.
I'm going to chime back in. I just want to say really quickly to thank you all for being here and everything that you're saying, that, it's really been great. Again, I cannot reiterate enough how the Spark of Hudson is just like really here to support anyone any way we can. Part of putting this panel together with all of you, we're definitely trying to, identifying, and also the people that we've been watching this past year do such amazing work, and also realizing that, like, even though there are collaborators here, a lot of you don't know each other. And so I'm really excited in more of the like larger cosmic sense of like, oh great, like you all will like, have the opportunity to like work together, because I think for me, and especially like my work at Spark and my work before, I've always realized, a lot of the time it's just that not having that connection with each other, and how important it is and how easy it is to like have that, and how more impactful that could be. So I'm really happy, you know, I was just like, oh, like, I think, you know, these people will work together. And that was kind of part of the spark of the panel, so to speak, just, you know, really loving the work that you do, and thank you. And I guess if everyone could, if you have suggestions about, if someone's watching right now and they're like, okay, like, you're all involved in direct action, which is also why it's so amazing. You know, it's not like we're just sitting here on the sidelines being like, this is what we think should happen. You all have been really doing the labor and are committed to continue to do that. And so if you, for people watching who are like, okay, yes, like, I love this energy, I love what you have to say. If there's any way that we could, people who are watching can get involved in direct ways, be that volunteering or monetary, please, like, I would love for you to shout that out.
Yeah, so La Morada has a website, lamorada.nyc, and in our website, the first button is information about our mutual aid kitchen. If you clicked on it, there will be a section that describes what is our idea behind a mutual aid. So for folks that want to start volunteering or helping out the community, just like, if you, the first thing you could do, if you could just like go through and read through the guidelines that establishes some safety parameters, like not working with certain agents that affect the BIPOC community. That could really help us navigate some future issues that we might face against class and race, and just erase a couple of frictions that we're seeing. People, white people, just coming through and trying to co-opt our work. So if you could just read through the mutual aid guidelines, that will be very helpful for La Morada.
Thanks. I mean, I just want to chime in from the policy perspective. We work not writing policy, but encouraging policymakers to make effective change. And one of the best strategies that I can suggest there is to start small, you know, talk, especially in New York City, talk to your city council members, because those city council members become mayor, or they become the public advocate who becomes, you know, a candidate for president at some point. You know, the mayor of New York City obviously didn't win, but the ideas get out there. So really encouraging people to talk to the local politicians, because that does make a difference in your community, even as, you know, futile as it might feel and not effective. We have a new administration. It's not perfect by any means, but keep driving change by talking to politicians, even though sometimes you might want to bash your head into a wall. And I have to run. I can hear my kids yelling, but I thank you all so much for spending the last hour and 20 minutes together, and I would love to keep in touch with everybody. Thanks so much to Spark of Hudson for pulling us all together. Bye.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, so thank you all, and thank you everyone for watching. And yeah, like, on our social media, we'll definitely have like a list of the organizations and ways that you can support them, either by volunteering or donating money. Really, thank you all so much for just being here and like sharing your experiences and expertise. And it was definitely not to be cheesy, food for thought. So I'm sorry, I was the worst. Yeah, unless someone has like something they'd like to say, I think we could just like wrap it up. But I want to definitely give space if someone wants to say something. Now, it's looking like we're all content. All right.
Thank you, Shanika.
Hi, have a good one.
Thanks, y'all. Pleasure to be on the